Come here. I'll break your cage. Mafia boss freed, the terrified bride locked away by her fiancé. The silence in the penthouse was not peaceful. It was heavy, manufactured, and pressurized, like the air inside a submarine sitting at the bottom of the ocean. Lila Hayes stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the guest suite that had become her entire world for the last 4 days. From the 52nd floor, the city of New Harbor looked like a circuit board of gold and amber lights, humming with energy and freedom. Down there, people were hailing taxis, walking into restaurants, and laughing with friends. Up here, the air was recycled, chilled to a precise 68 degrees, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and despair. Lila pressed her palm against the thick, reinforced glass. Her hand looked pale and small against the backdrop of the sprawling metropolis. She turned her back on the view, unable to bear the sight of a life she could no longer touch. The room was luxurious, decorated in shades of cream and dove gray, filled with furniture that cost more than her father made in a year. But luxury did not mask the function of the space. It was a cell. She looked up at the corner of the ceiling. The small red eye of the security camera blinked once. A steady, rhythmic reminder that she was never truly alone. Brandon was watching, or his security team was watching. It did not matter who was on the other end of the feed. The result was the same. She was a specimen in a jar, preserved for a wedding date that was rapidly approaching. Her phone lay on the mahogany dresser, dead and useless. Brandon had disabled it the moment he brought her here, claiming she needed a digital detox to settle her nerves. He called it protection. He called it love. Lila knew it for what it was. It was isolation. The heavy thud of the electronic lock disengaging made her flinch. The sound was distinct, a mechanical clack followed by a hydraulic hiss. Lila stiffened, her spine snapping straight as she clasped her hands together to hide the trembling. She moved away from the window, positioning herself in the center of the room, trying to look composed. The door swung open. Brandon Cole stepped inside. He looked like the Prince of New Harbor, the man every magazine wanted on its cover. He wore a charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His blonde hair swept back in a style that managed to look both casual and expensive. In his hand, he held a massive bouquet of white lilies, their scent instantly overpowering the sterile lemon smell of the room. "Hello, darling," Brandon said, his voice smooth and warm. He closed the door behind him but did not lock it. He did not need to. He was the jailer. Lila forced a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "Hello, Brandon." He walked toward her, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet. He held out the flowers, his blue eyes scanning her face with a possessive gleam that made her skin crawl. "I brought these for you," he said, thrusting the bouquet into her arms. "Lilies are your favorite, or at least, they will be for the wedding. We need to make sure the floral arrangements are consistent with the press release." "Thank you," she whispered. The stems were damp and cold against her hands. Brandon reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch lingered on her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. It was a caress, but there was no affection in it. It was the way a collector touched a rare statue, checking for dust. "You look tired, Lila," he said, his tone dropping to a murmur. "You've been pacing again. I can see it on the feed. You need to rest. You need to be radiant for Saturday." "I am just anxious," Lila said, taking a small step back, breaking the contact. "Being locked in here makes it hard to sleep." Brandon's smile tightened at the corners. The warmth evaporated from his eyes, replaced by a flat, shark-like stillness. "We've talked about this," he said. "You are not locked in. You are being kept safe. The press is hounding us, and your father's creditors are becoming aggressive. If you stepped outside this building, you would be swarmed. I am protecting you." Lila gripped the flowers tighter, a thorn digging into her thumb, the sharp pain grounding her. "My father called me before you took my phone. He said the debts were cleared. He said you paid them." "I did," Brandon said, stepping closer again, invading her personal space until she could smell his expensive cologne and the faint scent of scotch on his breath. "I paid $2 million to clear your family's name. I saved them from ruin. I saved your father from a heart attack induced by stress. Think of how much you owe me, Lila. Think of what would happen to them if I stopped protecting them." The threat hung in the air, invisible but suffocating. Lila looked down at the lilies. She knew exactly what he meant. If she ran, if she made a scene, the money would disappear. The lawsuits would return, and her fragile, aging parents would be crushed. "I know," she said softly. "I am grateful." "Good," Brandon said. He patted her cheek, the gesture stinging with condescension. "Be a good girl, and we will have a wonderful life. Just do not touch the keypad again. The security logs show you tried the code 3 times yesterday." Lila's breath hitched. She had hoped he hadn't noticed. "If you try it again," Brandon continued, his voice cheerful and light, "I will have to tie you to the bed, and while I might enjoy that, I do not think you would like the bruises on your wrists for the photos." He leaned in and kissed her forehead, a dry, perfunctory seal of ownership. "Dinner will be sent up in an hour," he said. "Eat all of it. You are looking thin." He turned and walked out. The heavy door swung shut. The mechanical clack of the lock echoed through the room, vibrating in Lila's bones. She stood frozen for a long minute, waiting until she was sure he was gone. Then, her legs gave out. She sank to the floor, the lilies tumbling from her grasp and scattering across the carpet like spilled milk. She pulled her knees to her chest, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She looked at her left wrist. The faint yellow-green bruising from the last time he had grabbed her was still visible under the sleeve of her silk blouse. She traced the marks with a shaking finger. He was going to kill her. Maybe not physically, maybe not immediately, but he was going to hollow her out until there was nothing left but a mannequin who smiled for cameras. Lila looked at the window, at the freedom that was tantalizingly close, yet miles away. Tears blurred her vision, turning the city lights into smeared streaks of fire. "No one is coming," she whispered to the empty room. No one knows. 10 miles south of the penthouse, in the dim, smoky atmosphere of the Emerald Room. Nico Moretti checked his watch. It was a Patek Philippe, understated and worth more than the building they were sitting in. He sat in a leather booth at the back of the private club, a glass of water in front of him. He did not drink when he was working, and dealing with Brandon Cole was definitely work. Nico was 34 years old, with the kind of face that stopped conversations when he walked into a room. He had dark hair, cut short and practical, and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a knife fight when he was 20, interrupting the otherwise severe perfection of his features. He wore a black dress shirt, the top button undone, revealing the edge of the ink that covered his chest and shoulders. He did not look like a businessman, and he did not look like a thug. He looked like a predator who had learned to wear a suit. "Sorry I am late," a voice boomed. Nico did not flinch. He watched as Brandon Cole slid into the booth opposite him, beaming as if they were old friends meeting for a round of golf. Brandon signaled the waitress for a drink without asking Nico if he wanted anything. "Traffic was a nightmare," Brandon said, unbuttoning his jacket. "And I had to stop by and see the little lady. You know how it is, wedding jitters." Nico leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You are 40 minutes late, Cole. My time is expensive." Brandon laughed, waving a hand dismissively. "Relax, Nico. You always sound so serious. We are celebrating. The deal is done. The zoning permits for the waterfront project came through this morning." Nico remained still. The stillness was his weapon. It made men like Brandon nervous. Men like Brandon needed noise and motion to feel important. Nico just needed silence. "The permits are good," Nico said, his voice a low baritone that rumbled through the table. "But permits do not pay the interest on the loan you took from us. You are 2 weeks past the deadline on the first repayment installment." Brandon's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he plastered it back on. "It is a cash flow issue, purely temporary. I had to move some liquidity around to secure the venue for the reception and handle some family debts." "Family debts," Nico repeated flatly. "Yeah," Brandon said, taking a large gulp of the scotch the waitress had just placed in front of him. "My fiancé." Her family is a mess, bankrupt. I had to bail them out to make sure the wedding looks right. You know how it is. Women are expensive assets. Nico's jaw tightened. He hated the word, assets. Brandon spoke about people as if they were lines on a ledger. So you used my money to pay for your wedding, Nico said. I used the money to secure my investment, Brandon corrected, leaning forward conspiratorially. And trust me, she is worth it. Beautiful girl, a little skittish. Though, I have her locked up in the penthouse until the ceremony, literally. Brandon chuckled, swirling the ice in his glass. Nico stared at him. The joke hung in the air, sour and ugly, locked up. Most men use that phrase metaphorically, the old ball and chain. But something in Brandon's eyes, a glint of genuine malice, told Nico he was not speaking in metaphors. You locked her in? Nico asked, his voice dangerously quiet. For her own good, Brandon said, oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. She was having a panic attack, trying to run away. I cannot have a runaway bride on the front page of the Times, can I? I put her in the guest suite, changed the codes. She will calm down by Saturday. Once we are married, she will settle into her role. Nico felt a cold spike of disgust in his gut. He was a criminal. He dealt in violence, extortion, and illegal trade, but the Moretti Code was strict. You did not hurt women. You did not cage them. And you certainly did not brag about it to a business partner. Focus on the money, Brandon, Nico said, cutting him off. I do not care about your domestic problems. I want the payment tomorrow. Brandon sighed, leaning back. You will have it. I just need a few days to move the funds from the offshore account back to the domestic one. Tomorrow, Nico said, standing up, or I take the waterfront property as collateral. And Brandon? Brandon looked up, blinking. What? Do not make me come looking for you. You will not like it. Nico walked out of the club without looking back. The air outside was cool, but it didn't wash away the greasy feeling of sitting across from Brandon Cole. 3 hours later, Nico stood in his office at the back of a logistics warehouse on the edge of the harbor. The room was utilitarian, concrete walls, a heavy steel desk, and a bank of monitors on the wall. His lieutenant, Adrian, tossed a file onto the desk. You were right. Adrian said, he's not just late, he's stealing. Nico picked up the file, flipping through the pages. It was a printout of bank transfers. He moved the $3 million we lent him into a shell company in the Caymans, Adrian explained, pointing to a highlighted line. Then he moved it again. Split into 4 different accounts. He's not having cash flow problems. He's trying to hide the capital so he can claim bankruptcy on the shell company and stiff us on the loan. He thinks we are stupid. Nico stared at the numbers. It was an insult, a deliberate, calculated insult. Brandon Cole thought because he wore a tuxedo and appeared on television. He was untouchable. He thought the Morettis were just blunt instruments he could use and discard. He is mocking us, Nico said quietly. If we let him slide, every developer in the city will think they can steal from us. What is the call? Adrian asked. Do we send a team to break his legs? No, Nico said. He closed the file. Broken legs heal. And he would spin it as a mugging. We need leverage. We need to scare him so badly that he wires the money back before he even changes his underwear. Nico walked over to the window that looked out over the dark water of the harbor. He thought about the meeting at the club. He thought about Brandon's arrogance, and he thought about the comment that had been nagging at him all night. I have her locked up in the penthouse. Is he at the apartment? Nico asked. Adrian checked his tablet. No. Surveillance puts him at a stag party at the Gilded Lounge. He will be there until 3 a.m. And the penthouse? Security is automated, Adrian said. 2 guards in the lobby. But the private elevator requires a biometric scan. The penthouse itself is empty, except for the fiancé. Nico turned from the window. We are going in. To the penthouse? Adrian asked, surprised. Why? Because that is where he feels safe, Nico said. We are going to leave a message on his pillow. I want to show him that no door is closed to us. I want him to come home and realize that we can touch him whenever we want. Nico rolled down the sleeves of his shirt and reached for his jacket. Get the car, he ordered, and bring the tech kit. We're going to pay Mr. Cole a visit. The Cole Plaza building was a fortress of glass and steel, piercing the night sky. Getting past the lobby guard was easy, a distraction provided by one of Nico's associates outside involving a minor fender bender. Getting up the elevator took 30 seconds of Adrian's wizardry with a cloning device they had lifted from a maintenance worker weeks ago. The elevator doors slid open on the 52nd floor with a soft chime. Nico stepped out, followed by Adrian and a silent enforcer named Luca. The penthouse was vast. Moonlight spilled across marble floors and abstract sculptures. It felt cold. It felt dead. "Clear the rooms," Nico whispered. "Do not break anything unless you have to. We are ghosts." Adrian went left toward the office. Luca went right toward the kitchen. Nico walked straight down the main hallway, his footsteps making no sound. He was looking for the master bedroom, intending to leave the single black chess piece, a knight that was his calling card on Brandon's pillow. It was a psychological game. It meant, "I am in your house." As he passed a hallway branching off to the east wing, he stopped. He heard a sound. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of the building's ventilation. A rhythmic, dull thumping, like someone hitting a wall with a soft fist. And then, a sound that was unmistakable. A muffled sob. Nico frowned. He turned down the east hallway. The decor here was the same, expensive, minimalist, but at the end of the corridor, there was a door that did not fit. It was a heavy, solid core door with a reinforced frame, and instead of a standard handle, it had a digital keypad glowing with a red light. Nico approached it slowly. The sobbing on the other side stopped, replaced by a terrified silence. Whoever was inside had heard him approach. "I have her locked up." Nico had thought it was an exaggeration. He had thought Brandon meant he had taken her keys or forbidden her from going out. He did not think the man had actually installed a prison cell in his home. Adrian appeared at the end of the hall, holding a hard drive. "I got the files. We are good to go." Nico ignored him. He stared at the keypad. "Open this," he said. Adrian blinked, then hurried forward. He looked at the keypad, pulling a small interface device from his pocket. "This is industrial grade. Give me 10 seconds. Nico waited, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He did not know why he was doing this. The mission was to get leverage, not to get involved in a domestic dispute, but the image of a woman trapped in a box while Brandon drank scotch and laughed about it made his blood run hot. "Got it," Adrian whispered. The light on the keypad turned green. The lock disengaged with a heavy clack. "Wait here," Nico ordered his men. He pushed the handle down and opened the door. The room inside was dim, lit only by the ambient city glow filtering through the window. The air was stale. Nico stepped over the threshold, his eyes adjusting instantly to the low light. He saw the bed bolted to the floor. He saw the camera in the corner with its blinking red eye. And then he saw her. She was pressed into the furthest corner of the room, wedged between a heavy dresser and the wall. She was wearing a silk nightgown that looked too thin for the air-conditioned chill. Her knees were pulled up, her arms wrapped around her head as if she were trying to shield herself from a blow. She was shaking so hard he could see the vibrations from across the room. Lila looked up, her eyes wide and feral with terror. She saw a silhouette in the doorway, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing black, tattoos creeping up his neck, his face cast in shadow. "Please," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "Please, I did not touch the door. I promise, I did not touch it." She thought he was Brandon, or worse. She thought he was someone Brandon had sent to punish her. Nico froze. The raw fear in her voice hit him like a physical blow. He had seen fear before. He traded in it. But this was different. This was the fear of a trapped animal that had given up on hope. He looked at the camera in the ceiling. He looked at the bruises faintly visible on her arms where she gripped her own shoulders. The mission parameters shifted in his mind. The leverage was no longer a file on a hard drive. The leverage and the crime was right here, huddled in the corner. He did not step back. He did not leave. He stepped into the room, the door clicking shut gently behind him. Nico Moretti stood in the center of the room, his stillness a sharp contrast to the trembling woman in the corner. He did not move toward her immediately. Instead, he let his gaze sweep the space with the cold, analytical precision of a man who had spent his life assessing threats. He saw the high-definition camera mounted in the corner, its red light pulsing like a slow heartbeat. He saw the mahogany dresser, bare of any personal effects, no photos, no jewelry, and most importantly, no phone. He looked at the bed. It was a massive four-poster structure, draped in expensive Egyptian cotton, but Nico noticed the base. Heavy steel brackets were bolted directly into the hardwood floor. This was not a guest suite. It was not a bridal preparation room. It was a holding cell designed to look like a five-star hotel. Nico felt a surge of revulsion rise in his throat, bitter and sharp. He had done many dark things in his life. He had extorted businesses, run illegal gambling rings, and broken men who crossed the line, but he had never caged a human being. The calculation required to bolt a bed to the floor, to monitor a woman 24 hours a day, spoke of a sickness that went beyond simple criminality. Adrian, Nico said, his voice low and dangerous. Kill the cameras. Adrian, who'd been hovering in the doorway, tapped furiously on his tablet. A second later, the red light on the ceiling camera winked out. Loop the footage from 10 minutes ago. Nico ordered. Make it look like nothing is happening in here. Then step out. Close the door. But boss, Adrian started, eyeing Lila warily. Now, Adrian nodded, signaling Luca to follow him. They retreated into the hallway, the heavy door clicking shut, leaving Nico alone with the terrified woman. Lila had not moved. She was pressed so hard against the wall that she looked like she was trying to merge with the plaster. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, her eyes darting from Nico's face to his hands, then back to his face. She looked at him as if he were a monster that had just crawled out from under the bed. "Did he hire you?" she whispered. Her voice was brittle, barely a sound. "Is this a test?" Nico frowned, the harsh lines of his face deepening. "A test? To see if I would try to leave," Lila said, the words tumbling out faster now. "I did not try. I was just standing here. Please tell him I was just standing here. I do not want to be punished." Nico felt a muscle in his jaw jump. Brandon Cole had done a thorough job. He had not just locked her up. He had broken her spirit. He had turned a woman who should be preparing for a celebration into a creature who begged for mercy because she was standing in the wrong part of a room. "I do not work for Brandon Cole," Nico said. His voice was deep, scraping against the silence of the room, but he kept the volume low. "I am the last person on earth that man would hire right now." Lila blinked, confusion warring with her terror. "Then who are you? Why are you here?" Nico took a slow breath. "He's in debt to my family. He owes the wrong people a lot of money, and he decided to steal from us instead of paying it back. I came here to take something of value to remind him of his obligations." He looked at her, his gray eyes softening as the reality of the situation settled heavy on his shoulders. He had come for leverage. He had come to steal a watch, or a laptop, or simply to leave a threat. Instead, he had found a crime in progress. "I did not know you were in here," Nico said. "But now that I do, I need you to tell me the truth. Are you staying in this room because you want to?" Lila let out a fractured, hysterical sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Want to? I have not been outside in 4 days. He took my shoes. He took my phone. He said it is for my own good." She hugged herself tighter, her knuckles white. "He says I am sick. He says I need to be protected from myself. But he is the one who put the keypad on the door." The confession hung in the air. It was the final confirmation Nico needed. The rules of his world were strict, but simple. You settled debts with money or blood. You did not involve civilians. And you never, ever looked away when someone was being held against their will. Nico made a decision. It was a stupid decision. It was a decision that would cost him money, expose his organization to a federal investigation, and likely start a war with the political machine that backed Brandon Cole. He did not care. He stepped forward, moving slowly, telegraphing every motion so he would not spook her. He stopped 5 feet away and slowly raised his hands, palms open, showing her he held no weapon. "Look at me," he said. Lila looked up, her wide, tear-filled eyes locking onto his. "I am leaving this apartment," Nico said calmly, "and I am taking you with me." Lila froze. The hope that flared in her chest was so painful it almost knocked the wind out of her, but the fear was stronger. She shook her head violently. "I cannot," she gasped. "You do not understand. He will find me. He has cameras everywhere. He has guards in the lobby. If I leave, he will hurt my parents. He told me he would destroy them. He can try," Nico said. The arrogance in his voice was not boastful. It was a statement of fact, as solid as the floor beneath them. "But he will have to go through me to do it, and I am much harder to kill than a bankrupt old man." He took another step closer, his hand extending toward her. "You have a choice," he said, his voice dropping to a murmur that vibrated in her chest. "You can stay in this room and wait for him to come back. You can marry him on Saturday and spend the rest of your life wondering if he will lock you up again every time you make him angry. Or you can trust me." Lila looked at his hand. It was large, scarred, and terrifying. It was the hand of a man who knew violence, but it was also steady. It was not shaking. It was not grabbing. It was offering. "I do not even know your name," she whispered. "Nico," he said. "My name is Nico." He looked deep into her eyes, seeing the war between conditioned fear and the desperate desire for freedom. "Come here," he said softly. "I will break your cage." The words shattered something inside her. The carefully constructed wall of obedience she had built to survive the last week crumbled. Lila pushed herself off the wall. Her legs felt like water, but she forced them to move. She took one step, then another. The space between them seemed to shrink. The air felt charged, electric with the magnitude of the choice she was making. She reached out, her fingers trembling uncontrollably, and placed her hand in his. His grip closed around hers instantly. It was warm. It was rough. It was the most grounding thing she had felt in months. Nico did not pull her. He just held her, letting her feel the anchor of his presence. He looked down at her, noticing for the first time how violently she was shivering. The air conditioning in the room was frigid, and she was wearing nothing but a thin slip of silk. He released her hand only long enough to shrug off his suit jacket. The black fabric was heavy, lined with silk, and still held the warmth of his body. He draped it over her shoulders, pulling the lapels together to cover her chest. Lila flinched as the heavy fabric settled on her, her body expecting a blow. But when the warmth hit her skin, she let out a shuddering breath. The jacket smelled of sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and something sharp and clean, like rain on pavement. It smelled like a man, not a disinfectant. "Let us go," Nico said. He kept one arm around her shoulders, shielding her, and guided her toward the door. When he opened it, Adrian and Luca snapped to attention, their hands hovering near their waistbands. They looked at the girl wrapped in their boss's jacket, then at Nico. "We're leaving," Nico said. "Wipe the logs. Make sure there is no footage of us entering or exiting." Adrian's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "Done." They moved through the penthouse like shadows. Nico kept Lila tucked against his side, his body a barrier between her and the open space. She walked with her head down, terrified that at any moment Brandon would step out of the shadows, smiling that terrible, polished smile. When they reached the private elevator, Lila stopped. Her feet glued themselves to the marble floor. "Wait!" she gasped, panic seizing her throat again. "My parents, they live in the suburbs. If Brandon finds out I am gone, he will send people there tonight. He has done it before. He sent a man to sit in their living room just to scare them into signing the papers." Nico pressed the call button for the elevator, then turned to face her. He placed his hands on her upper arms, rubbing gently to bring warmth back into her frozen limbs. "Listen to me," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "By the time Brandon realizes you are gone, I will have a team sitting outside your parents' house. If anyone Cole sends steps onto their lawn, they will regret it. Brandon is a bully. Lila, he is used to pushing people who cannot push back. He has never had to push a Moretti. The elevator doors slid open. Nico guided her inside. He is done hurting you, Nico promised. As the elevator descended, dropping 52 floors in seconds, Lila slumped against the mirrored wall. She pulled Nico's jacket tighter around herself, burying her nose in the lapel, inhaling the scent of the stranger who had just kicked down her door. Nico watched the numbers count down, 30, 20, 10. He could feel the adrenaline fading, replaced by the cold, hard reality of logistics. He had just kidnapped the fiancé of one of the most high-profile men in the city. He had no plan. He had no strategy. He just had a shivering woman in his jacket and a gut feeling that he had done the only thing he could live with. The car was waiting in the loading bay of the underground garage, a black sedan with tinted windows that looked like a shadow on wheels. Luca opened the back door, and Nico helped Lila inside. She curled into the leather seat immediately, pulling her knees to her chest, making herself as small as possible. Nico slid in beside her. "Drive," Nico told the driver. "Take the river route. Go to the warehouse on 4th. The car peeled out of the garage, slipping into the anonymous stream of city traffic. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The city lights flashed past the tinted windows, streaks of neon blue and sodium orange. Lila watched them with wide, unblinking eyes. She was waiting for the sirens. She was waiting for the phone call. She was waiting for the car to stop and for Brandon to yank the door open. But the car kept moving. Nico sat rigidly on his side of the seat, staring straight ahead. His mind was racing, calculating angles. Brandon would go to the police, but not immediately. He would try to find her himself first to avoid the scandal. That gave them 12 hours, maybe 24. He needed to secure the safe house. He needed to get Adrian to scrub the digital footprint. He needed to figure out what to do with a woman who was technically a stolen asset. He glanced sideways at her. Lila had closed her eyes, her cheek resting against the leather. Her hand was gripping the lapel of his jacket so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked exhausted, fragile, and impossibly young. "Why did you do it?" Her voice was so quiet he almost missed it over the hum of the engine. Nico looked at her. She had opened her eyes and was watching him. "You could have just left," she said. "You could have taken what you wanted and left me there. Why risk it?" Nico looked down at his hands. He flexed his fingers, watching the tendons shift under the skin. "I do not like cages," he said simply. It was not the whole truth, but it was the only truth he had words for right now. They drove in silence until the skyline of the city center faded, replaced by the industrial silhouettes of the Docklands. The car turned down a narrow alleyway and pulled into the loading bay of a renovated brick warehouse. The heavy metal shutter rattled down behind them, sealing them in. "We are here," Nico said. He helped her out of the car. Lila's legs were stiff, and she stumbled as her feet hit the concrete. Nico caught her arm, steadying her. "It is safe here," he said. "No cameras, no keypads." He led her up a flight of steel stairs to the living quarters on the 2nd floor. The door opened into a wide, open-plan loft. It was industrial but warm, with exposed brick walls, plush rugs, and soft, ambient lighting. A woman was waiting for them by the kitchen island. She was short, stout, and had a face that looked like it had been carved out of kindness. This was Rosa, the woman who had raised Nico more than his own mother had. Rosa wiped her hands on a dish towel and hurried forward, her dark eyes taking in the scene instantly. The bruised, terrified girl wearing Nico's giant suit jacket, and Nico standing behind her like a guard dog. "Madre di Dio," Rosa murmured, crossing herself. "Nico, you brought a stray. She is a guest." "Rosa," Nico said, "she needs a hot shower, food and clothes. Burn whatever she is wearing." Rosa nodded, her expression shifting from surprise to gentle determination. She stepped up to Lila and reached out, not touching her, just beckoning. "Come, child," Rosa said softly. "You are freezing. Let us get you warm. The water pressure here is good. It will wash away the day." Lila looked at Nico. He nodded once. A sharp, affirmative jerk of his chin. "Go," he said. "I will be right here." Lila followed Rosa down the hall. Nico watched her go, feeling a strange emptiness in his chest the moment she was out of his sight. He turned and walked to the massive industrial window that looked out over the dark, oily water of the harbor. He stood there for a long time, watching the ships move in the distance, trying to quiet the noise in his head. He had started a war tonight, he knew it, and for the first time in his life, he did not know how it was going to end. 40 minutes later, he heard soft footsteps on the hardwood floor. Nico turned. Lila stood in the entrance to the living area. She looked transformed, and yet even more vulnerable. Her hair was damp, hanging and loose, dark waves around her face. Rosa had given her a pair of soft gray leggings and one of Nico's old hoodies, a charcoal gray garment that was 3 sizes too big for her. The sleeves hung past her hands, and the hem reached her mid-thigh. She looked clean, she looked soft, and she looked like she belonged in his clothes. The air in the room shifted. It became thick, heavy with an awkwardness that buzzed against Nico's skin. He realized suddenly that he was staring, and he forced himself to look her in the eyes rather than at the curve of her legs. "Better?" he asked. His voice rougher than he intended. Lila nodded. She pulled the sleeves down over her hands, fidgeting. "Rosa is making soup. She told me to come sit down." She took a few hesitant steps into the room. Nico did not move from the window. He stayed in the shadows, feeling like a jagged edge in the soft room. "Thank you," Lila said. Her voice trembled, cracking on the second word. "You do not have to thank me," Nico said. "I do," she insisted. She stopped in the middle of the room, wrapping her arms around herself. "You do not know what it was like, the silence, the waiting. I thought I was going to die in that room, not from hunger, but from fading away. I thought I would just disappear, and no one would ever know I was gone." Her voice rose, thin and panicked, as the memory of the locked room crashed back into her. The relief of the shower had washed away the dirt, but it had not washed away the trauma. "I traced the cracks in the ceiling," she whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. "I counted them. 112 cracks. I counted them every hour. I was so scared that if I stopped counting, the walls would close in." She was starting to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved under the oversized hoodie. Nico moved. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. He did not stop until he was standing directly in front of her, invading her space, blocking out the rest of the world with his size. Lila looked up at him, her face wet with tears, her body shaking. Nico raised his hands. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his palms hovering near her shoulders. He was not a comforter. He was not a gentleman. He broke things. He did not fix them. But seeing her fall apart in front of him broke something in him too. He lowered his hands, resting them on her shoulders. His grip was solid, heavy, and warm. "Breathe," he commanded softly. "You are not there. You are here. Look at the walls. No cracks." Lila let out a sob that sounded like it was being torn out of her chest. She surged forward, crashing into him. Nico froze as her arms wrapped around his waist, her face burying itself in his chest. She was clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. Instinct took over. Nico's arms went around her, pulling her in. He held her firmly, one hand pressing the back of her head against his sternum, the other wrapped tight around her waist. It was a protective hold, a shield against the ghosts of the penthouse. But as they stood there, the nature of the embrace began to change. Lila was soft against the hardness of his chest. He could feel the heat of her body seeping through the thin cotton of the hoodie. He could smell the soap on her skin, fresh and clean. Lila felt the solid wall of muscle beneath her cheek. She felt the slow, steady thrum of his heart. He was dangerous. She knew that. But right now, his danger was directed outward, away from her. In his arms, she felt a safety so profound it made her knees weak. They stood locked together in the dim light for a long minute, neither willing to let go. The sounds of the harbor outside faded away. There was only the sound of their breathing, ragged and sinking up. Nico became acutely aware of the curve of her spine under his hand. He became aware of how perfectly she fit against him. A jolt of electricity. sharp and warning, shot through him. This was not just a rescue anymore. This was something else. Lila pulled back slightly, just enough to look up at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed but searching. Her hands were still resting on his waist, clutching his shirt. They were too close. The air between them crackled with a sudden, undeniable tension. Nico looked down at her mouth, then forced his gaze back to her eyes. He stepped back, his hands lingering on her arms for a second before dropping to his sides. "You should eat," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, strained and deep. "Rosa will be angry if the soup gets cold." Lila nodded, stepping back as well, missing the warmth of him instantly. "Okay," she whispered. She turned toward the kitchen, but she glanced back once. Nico was watching her, his expression dark and unreadable, like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether to step back or jump. The morning light filtered through the high, grime-streaked windows of the warehouse, casting long, pale rectangles across the concrete floor. Lila Hayes woke slowly, her body heavy with the kind of deep, exhausted sleep she had not experienced in months. For a moment, she panicked, her heart hammering against her ribs as she expected to see the reinforced door and the blinking red eye of the camera. But the ceiling was different. It was industrial steel, not plaster, and the air smelled of roasted coffee and old books, not sterile lemon polish. She sat up, blinking against the light. She was on a wide, velvet couch, covered by a thick wool blanket. She turned her head and froze. Nico was there. He was asleep in a leather armchair pulled close to the couch, positioned between her and the door. He looked different than the terrifying figure who had stormed into the penthouse. His suit jacket was gone, draped over the back of the chair. His dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat and the edge of a tattoo that disappeared under the fabric. One of his hands rested on the arm of the chair, relaxed and open, just inches from where her feet had been under the blanket. It was an unconscious gesture of protection. He had not just slept, he had kept watch. Lila pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, watching him in sleep. The hard lines of his face were smoothed out. He looked younger, less like a weapon and more like a man who carried too much weight. She remembered the heat of his body when he had held her the night before, the solid, immovable strength that had stopped her from shattering. As if sensing her gaze, Nico shifted, his eyes snapped open, instantly alert. There was no grogginess, no moment of confusion. He looked at the door, then at the window, and finally at her. The sharpness in his gray eyes softened just a fraction when he saw she was awake. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Lila whispered. Nico sat up, rolling his shoulders as if to work out the stiffness of sleeping in a chair. He ran a hand through his dark hair, messing up the short strands. "There is coffee," he said, nodding toward the kitchen area. "Rosa left a pot before she went to the market." Lila stood up, her legs feeling steadier than they had the night before. She was still wearing the oversized hoodie and leggings, and she felt small inside the borrowed clothes. She followed him to the kitchen island. Nico poured 2 mugs of black coffee and slid one toward her. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. She took a sip. It was strong, bitter, and grounding. Nico leaned against the counter, watching her over the rim of his mug. He did not look away, and he did not try to fill the silence with small talk. "You have questions," he stated. Lila nodded. She looked down at the dark liquid in her cup. "Who are you? Nico? Really? You said Brandon owes you money, but bankers do not break into penthouses at midnight." Nico set his mug down. "No, they do not." He paused, seeming to weigh how much truth she could handle. "I run an organization," he said carefully. "In New Harbor. There are 2 economies. There is the one you see, the skyscrapers, the tech firms, the Cole family empire, and then there is the one underneath it, the one that moves things through the docks, that lends money when banks say no, that handles disputes the law cannot touch. I run that second economy." Lila felt a chill run down her spine. "You are the Mafia." "We prefer other terms," Nico said dryly. "But yes, My family has held power in this city for 60 years. We operate in the shadows so men like Brandon Cole can shine in the light." He looked at her, his expression grim. "Brandon came to me 6 months ago. He needed cash to finish the waterfront development. Banks would not touch him because he was over-leveraged. I lent him $3 million. Last week, instead of paying me back, he moved that money into offshore accounts and laughed about it to my face." Lila lowered her mug. The realization hit her like a physical slap. She pieced together the timeline in her head. The loan, the pressure on her father, the sudden engagement. He did not just use the money for the building, she said, her voice trembling. He used it to buy me. Nico frowned. "What do you mean?" "My father's company," Lila said, the shame burning her cheeks. "We were bankrupt, completely under. Brandon stepped in and paid off the creditors. He saved my father from prison. It cost exactly $2 million. He told me last night that he saved us." She looked up at Nico, her eyes wide with horror. "He used your money to pay my father's debts so he could force me to marry him." Nico's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. He paid a debt with stolen money to acquire a wife he could lock in a room. Lila felt sick. She set the mug down before she dropped it. "I was not a bride," she whispered. "I was an asset. I was just another thing he bought with money that was not his." "And now," Nico said, his voice low and dangerous, "you are part of his leverage. He thought if he had you, he had the perfect public image, the reformed playboy settling down. It makes investors trust him. It makes stocks go up. Without you, the picture falls apart." He walked around the island and pulled out a stool for her. "Sit." Lila sat. Nico remained standing, his agitation radiating off him in waves. He was not angry at her. She could feel that. He was angry for her. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. How did it start?" Lila took a deep breath. "It started with flowers," she said. "Just like the ones he brought yesterday. He was charming. He took me to galas. He donated to my mother's favorite charities. Everyone told me how lucky I was. My friends, the press, my parents." She traced the grain of the wood on the counter, but then the walls started moving in. "First, he suggested I quit my job at the gallery because it was distracting me from wedding planning. Then he said my friends were jealous of his success and I should cut them off. If I disagreed, he would get cold. He would remind me of what he did for my father." She looked at Nico. "My father told me not to mess this up. He said Brandon was our only chance. When Brandon put the keypad on the door last week, he told me I was having a breakdown. He said I was hysterical and needed to be contained. After 2 days in that room, I started to believe him." Nico's hands were gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles were white. His anger was a palpable thing, simmering under the surface, hot and volatile. He hated bullies. He hated men who used power to crush people who could not fight back. He drummed his fingers on the table. "A sharp, staccato rhythm. He is a parasite," Nico said, his voice controlled but laced with venom. "He feeds on fear. But he made a mistake. He fed on the wrong people." He looked at her, his eyes burning with intensity. "I want to take him apart. Lila, not with a gun, but with the truth. I want to strip him of every dollar and every ounce of reputation he has. But I need your help." Lila straightened her spine. "What do you need?" "I need to know his business," Nico said. "You were close to him. You heard things. You saw who he met with. Tell me everything you remember about his deals, his accounts, the names he dropped." They spent the next 4 hours at the kitchen island. Nico brought out a laptop and a stack of files Adrian had left. Lila dug into her memory, pulling out every fragment of information she had stored away during months of silent observation. She remembered Brandon bragging about a charity gala where the donations were funneled into a holding company in Delaware. She remembered him meeting with a city councilman late at night in the penthouse study. She remembered the passwords he used for his tablet because he had once typed them in front of her while drunk. Nico typed furiously as she spoke, cross-referencing her memories with the data his team had stolen. "Here," Nico said, pointing to the screen. "The Charity Foundation? You said he mentioned the Children's Hope Fund?" "Yes," Lila said, leaning in, her shoulder brushing against his arm. He said it was a gold mine. Nico navigated through a series of spreadsheets. It is not a charity. It is a wash cycle. He takes donations, moves them through the fund to pay for construction materials at inflated prices from companies he owns. He is stealing from donors to build his hotels and using your money to cover the gaps, Lila added. Exactly. They worked in a rhythm, a seamless partnership that surprised them both. Lila was sharp. She noticed discrepancies in the dates. She connected names Nico had missed for the first time in months. She did not feel like a prisoner or a doll. She felt capable. But as the afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the room, a sudden wave of anxiety crashed over her. She looked at the screen, at the evidence of Brandon's crimes, and then at Nico. He was focused, intense, and undeniably dangerous. He was a crime boss. He was a man who lived by violence. Lila stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Nico stopped typing. He looked up. "What is it?" Lila backed away, wrapping her arms around herself. "What am I doing?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. "I am helping you destroy him so you can get your money back." "It is not just about the money," Nico said, standing up slowly. "Isn't it?" Lila asked. "You are a criminal. Nico, you just admitted it. You run the shadows. I ran away from one dangerous man, and now I'm sitting in a warehouse with another one. Did I just trade one cage for another? Am I just leverage to you too?" The words hung in the air, stinging and raw. Nico flinched. The accusation hit him harder than he expected. He stepped around the island, closing the distance between them. His face was hard, but his eyes were wounded. "Do not compare me to him," he said, his voice low and intense. He stopped 2 feet away from her. He pointed to the heavy steel door of the warehouse. "Look at that door. Lila, there is no keypad. There is no guard. It is unlocked." He looked back at her, his gaze holding hers with a ferocity that made her breath catch. "You can walk out of here right now. I will give you cash. I will call you a taxi. You can go wherever you want. I will not stop you. I will never lock you up." Lila stared at him, her chest heaving. She looked at the door, then back at him. "You want me to go?" she whispered. "No," Nico said immediately. The truth tumbled out before he could stop it. "No, I do not want you to go." "Why?" she asked. "Because," Nico said, taking a step closer, invading her space in a way that felt nothing like intimidation and everything like gravity. "Because you are the first thing in this city that feels real. Because when I found you in that room, I wanted to burn the world down for you. That is not leverage. Lila, that is something else." The argument melted away, replaced by a charged, thick silence. The air between them crackled. Lila looked up at him, tears glinting in her eyes. She saw the conflict in his face, the hardened criminal fighting the man who wanted to be gentle. Nico reached out. His hand hovered for a second before he gently brushed a stray strand of dark hair from her cheek. His fingers were rough, calloused from a life of violence, but his touch was feather-light. "Lila," he breathed. She did not pull away. Her heart was racing, hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she did not run. She leaned into his touch. Nico cupped her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to push him away. She did not. She tilted her chin up. Their mouths met. It was not a tentative, testing kiss. It was deep, sudden, and overwhelming. Nico groaned low in his throat, his hand sliding to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He kissed her with a hunger that had been building since the moment he saw her in the corner of that penthouse room. Lila gasped against his mouth, her hands instinctively reaching out to clutch his shirt. He tasted of coffee and danger, and something undeniably safe. It was a contradiction that made her head spin. The wrongness of kissing a mafia boss collided with the rightness of being in his arms, creating a spark that set her blood on fire. He pulled her closer, his other arm wrapping around her waist, pressing their bodies together. She could feel the hardness of his chest, the tension in his muscles. She felt small against him, but not weak. For the first time, she felt protected, not possessed. The kiss deepened, becoming slow and rhythmic. It was a conversation without words, a confession of shared loneliness and sudden terrifying need. Then, reality crashed back in. Lila pulled back, gasping for air. She stumbled a step away from him, her hand flying to her mouth. Her lips felt swollen and sensitive. "I cannot," she stammered, her eyes wide. "I cannot do this. I just left him yesterday. I cannot jump from one man to another like a rescue raft. It is not right. I am a mess." "Nico." Nico stood still, his chest heaving slightly. He looked at her, his eyes dark and blown wide. He ran a hand over his face, trying to clear the haze of desire. "You are right," he said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry. I should not have done that." He stepped back, putting physical distance between them, giving her the space she needed. He turned away, unable to look at the confusion on her face without wanting to pull her back into his arms. "I need to make a call," he said abruptly. He walked to the far end of the warehouse, pulling his phone from his pocket. He dialed Adrian's number, his fingers shaking slightly. "Adrian," he barked into the phone, "I need you to dig deeper. I want everything on the Cole family trust. Go back 10 years. If he bought a pack of gum with dirty money, I want a receipt." He paced as he spoke, channeling the frustrated energy into the mission. He could not have her, not yet, maybe not ever, but he could destroy the man who had hurt her. That would have to be enough. Night fell over the harbor, turning the water into a sheet of black oil reflecting the city lights. Inside the warehouse, the atmosphere was quiet and heavy with unspoken things. Lila sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her. Nico sat next to her. He was close enough that their shoulders brushed every time he shifted, sending small, electric sparks through her arm. But he did not touch her otherwise. The large television on the wall was tuned to the local news channel, the volume set to low. The screen showed a picture of Brandon Cole. He looked devastatingly handsome and heartbroken. The headline scrolled beneath his face in bold red letters. "Search continues for missing heiress. Wedding of the decade in jeopardy." "Look at him," Lila whispered, staring at the screen. "He looks so worried." "He's an actor," Nico said, his voice flat. "He's worried about his stock price, not you." On the screen, the news anchor cut to a clip of Brandon speaking at a press conference held on the steps of the Cole Plaza. "We just want Lila home safely," Brandon said into the microphones, his voice cracking perfectly. "She's been under a lot of stress. If anyone has seen her, please. We love her." Lila felt a surge of nausea. "He's so good at it. Everyone believes him." "Not everyone," Nico said. He shifted, turning his body toward her. He pointed at the screen. "He's controlling the narrative right now because he is the only one talking. But look at his eyes, Lila. He's blinking too much. He's sweating. He knows the walls are thin." Lila looked closer. Nico was right. Under the polished veneer, Brandon looked tight, coiled. "We have the documents," Nico said. "We have the proof of the fraud. But it is not enough to just release them anonymously. He will spin it. He will say it is a hack, a setup." "Then what do we do?" Lila asked. "We need to dismantle the image," Nico said. "We need to turn the perfect groom into a monster on live television." He leaned back, his shoulder pressing firmly against hers this time. He did not pull away, and neither did she. "How?" Lila asked. "We wait," Nico said. "We let him spin his lies. We let him play the victim. And while he is busy looking at the cameras, we cut the legs off his throne." He looked at her, his gaze intense and steady in the dim light of the television. "We are going to make him wish he never met you," Nico promised. Lila looked at Brandon's face on the screen, then at Nico. The fear that had defined her life for months was still there, but something new was growing alongside it, anger. And with Nico sitting beside her, a solid, warm presence in the dark, she finally felt brave enough to use it. She nodded. "Let us break him." They sat together in the dark, watching the news cycle repeat the lie. Two conspirators plotting the truth, bound by a kiss they were trying to forget and a war they were determined to win. The morning sun that filtered into the warehouse did nothing to warm the chill that settled in Lila's stomach as she watched the television screen. The volume was turned up now, filling the open space of the loft with the smooth, practiced voice of the local news anchor. "Breaking news this morning in the search for missing socialite Lila Hayes. the anchor announced, her face serious. Brandon Cole, CEO of Cole Holdings, has filed an official missing persons report, citing grave concerns for his fiancé's mental health. The screen cut to footage of Brandon standing on the steps of the police precinct. He looked devastated. His tie was slightly loosened, his hair perfectly messy, as if he had spent all night pacing in anguish. He held a microphone with a trembling hand. "Lila has been under immense pressure," Brandon said to the cameras, his voice thick with emotion. "She has been struggling with severe anxiety and episodes of confusion. We tried to keep it private to protect her dignity, but now I am just terrified she has hurt herself, or that someone has taken advantage of her fragile state." Lila felt the blood drain from her face. She stood frozen in the middle of the room, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "He's lying," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He's making me sound crazy." Nico stood behind the kitchen island, his eyes fixed on the screen. He was not looking at Brandon's face. He was looking at the narrative being constructed. It was a masterclass in manipulation, by painting Lila as unstable. Brandon was inoculating the public against anything she might say in the future. If she accused him of locking her up, he could claim it was a delusion. If she revealed his fraud, he could say she was being manipulated by criminals. "He's good," Nico muttered, his expression dark. "He's getting out ahead of the story. If we stay silent, his version becomes the truth." On the screen, Brandon wiped a tear from his cheek. "If anyone sees her, please call the number on the screen. She might be disoriented. She might not know who she is. We just want to bring her home to the care she needs." Lila let out a sharp, strangled sound of fury. She turned away from the television, pacing the length of the rug. "Care," she shouted, the anger finally breaking through the fear. "He locked me in a room with a bucket and a bolted bed. He took my shoes, and he is telling the world he wants to give me care." She stopped, her chest heaving, tears of humiliation burning her eyes. It was suffocating. Even from miles away, even from inside a safe house, Brandon was still controlling her life. He was rewriting her identity in real time, turning her from a victim into a patient. Nico walked around the counter and approached her. He did not crowd her, but he stepped close enough to intercept her pacing. He reached out, his large hand cupping the side of her face, his thumb brushing away a hot tear that tracked down her cheek. "He is a liar," Nico said, his voice low and firm as stone. "But he is a liar with a microphone. That makes him dangerous." "He will win," Lila said, leaning into his hand despite herself, her voice breaking. "Everyone believes him. My parents probably believe him. If I go to the police now, they will just hand me back to him and tell him to increase my medication." Nico's eyes hardened. "No, that only happens if we play by his rules. We're not going to play by his rules anymore." He dropped his hand from her face and turned toward the steel table where Adrian had set up a bank of laptops and servers. "We need to change the narrative," Nico said. "We need to stop hiding and start attacking. But to do that, we need more than just financial records. We need to know where the bodies are buried." He pulled out a chair in front of the main computer and looked at Lila. "You lived with him. You know his habits. You know his passwords. Sit down." Lila hesitated, wiping her face with the sleeve of the oversized hoodie. She looked at the computer, then at Nico. She was terrified of seeing what was inside Brandon's digital life, but the image of him on the television, fake tears in his eyes, lit a fire in her gut that burned hotter than the fear. She sat down. Nico stood behind her, one hand resting on the back of the chair, the other resting on the table next to her arm. His presence was a solid wall of heat at her back, steadying her. "Adrian," Nico said to his lieutenant, who was typing on a separate machine, "get us into the cloud server. Lila is going to give you the keys." The screen flickered, presenting a password prompt for Brandon's private cloud storage. "He changes it every month," Lila said, her voice trembling slightly. "But he always uses a variation of the street where he grew up, combined with the year he made his first million." "Try Oakwood 2015, she said. Adrian typed it in. "Access denied." Lila frowned, her brow furrowing. "Try Oakwood 2016. He likes to round up his achievements." Adrian typed. The screen flashed green. "Access granted. Good, Nico murmured, his hand shifting to rest lightly at the small of Lila's back. The touch was grounding, a reminder that she was not doing this alone. They began to sift through the folders. At first, it was mundane: receipts for suits, architectural blueprints, emails to catering companies. But as they dug deeper into the subfolders labeled miscellaneous assets, the tone changed. Nico, Lila said, pointing at a file name. Open that one. Private retreats. Adrian clicked the file. A spreadsheet opened, followed by a series of scanned invoices and non-disclosure agreements. Lila scanned the names on the list. They were women, young women. Some she recognized from the social circuit, aspiring models. Actresses who had briefly appeared at parties and then vanished from the scene. Next to each name was a sum of money and a location, usually a remote lodge in the mountains or a yacht registered in the Caribbean. "What is this?" Lila whispered, a cold dread settling in her stomach. Nico leaned in closer, his breath warm near her ear as he read the screen. He was not arranging vacations. He was arranging companions for his investors. He pointed to a column labeled Status. The entries read, Paid. NDA signed, managed. He was trading them, Nico said, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage, to secure his deals. He used these women to sweeten the pot for the politicians and bankers he needed favors from. Lila felt bile rise in her throat. She saw an email attached to one of the files. It was from Brandon to his head of security. "The girl from the gala is becoming a problem. She's asking too many questions. Handle it. Offer her $10,000 to go away, or remind her that her visa is sponsored by us." Lila covered her mouth with her hand. She was not just a bride to him. She was the ultimate asset, the one he kept for himself to prove he was legitimate, while he used others as currency. "I could have been one of them," she said, her voice barely audible. "If I had not been from a good family, if I had not been useful as a wife, I would just be a name on this list." She spun around in the chair, pushing herself away from the desk. The horror was too much. She looked up at Nico, searching for something in his face that made sense. But all she saw was the same hardness, the same violence that lived in this world of men who took what they wanted. "Are you any better?" she demanded, the words bursting out of her before she could stop them. Nico blinked, taken aback by the sudden attack. "Excuse me?" "You," she said, standing up, her hands shaking as she gestured around the warehouse. "You talk about him like he is a monster, but you run this city's shadows. You hurt people. You break laws. How is this any different? Are you just angry because he stole from you, or do you actually care that he hurts women?" The room went deadly silent. Adrian stopped typing. The air grew heavy and thick. Nico did not yell. He did not posture. He stepped into her space, his expression stripping down to something raw and honest. "I am a criminal." "Lila," he said, his voice rough, "I have never lied to you about that. I have broken bones. I have ruined men who crossed me. I have shot people who tried to kill me." He took another step, forcing her to look up at him, to see the truth in his gray eyes. "But I have never caged a woman. I have never sold a human being, and I have never used a child or a woman as a bargaining chip. In my world, there are lines. You do not cross them. Brandon Cole does not have lines. He thinks people are things." Lila stared at him, her chest heaving. She wanted to believe him, God, she wanted to believe him, but the fear was so deep, so entrenched after months of psychological torture, that trust felt like jumping off a cliff. "I do not know who to trust," she cried out, frustration boiling over. "I do not know what is real." She lashed out, her hand striking his chest in a desperate, flat-palmed slap. It was not an act of violence. It was an act of release, a physical expression of the chaos inside her. "I hate this," she yelled, hitting him again. "I hate him. I hate being scared." Nico did not flinch. He took the blows, his body solid as a rock, but when she raised her hand a third time, he caught her wrists. He did not squeeze. He did not wrench them. He held them gently, firmly, stopping her motion. "Lila," he said, his voice cracking with intensity. They stood there, chests heaving, the space between them charged with adrenaline and grief. Lila looked up at him, her eyes burning with tears. She saw the restraint in his face. She saw the way he looked at her, not as an asset, not as a victim, but as a woman he was desperate to reach. The anger in the air shifted, it twisted, transformed by the heat of the moment into something else entirely. Lila stopped fighting against his grip. She looked at his mouth. Nico saw the shift in her eyes. He saw the hunger that matched his own. He let go of her wrists and, in the same motion, wrapped his arms around her, pulling her crashing into him. This time, there was no hesitation. He kissed her like a starving man. It was fierce, desperate, and consuming. Lila made a whimpering sound in her throat and threw her arms around his neck, pulling him down to her. Months of fear, loneliness, and repressed emotion poured into the kiss. It was not gentle. It was a reclamation. Nico's hands roamed over her back, pressing her closer, as if he could merge her body with his and shield her from the world simply by proximity. Lila's fingers tangled in his hair, gripping tight, anchoring herself to the only solid thing she had left. They stumbled backward, their lips never breaking contact. Nico blindly guided them away from the computers, away from Adrian, who had wisely turned his back, and toward the partitioned sleeping area in the corner of the warehouse. They hit the edge of the mattress, and the impact jolted them. Nico broke the kiss, gasping for air, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were dark, the pupils blown wide, burning with a desire that terrified him. He wanted her. He wanted to erase every memory of Brandon from her skin. But as he looked at her flushed face, he saw the vulnerability beneath the passion. She was reacting to trauma. She was reaching for him because he was the opposite of her cage. If he took her now, in this state, he would be just another man taking advantage of her weakness. "No," he whispered, the word costing him everything. Lila blinked, breathless, her hands still clutching his shirt. "Nico?" Nico pulled back slightly, his hands moving to cup her face, holding her steady. "I want you," he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt in her bones. "I want you more than I have ever wanted anything, but not like this. Not when you are running from him." He brushed his thumb over her swollen lips. "I will not be a new prison for you, Lila, and I will not let you use me to forget him. When we do this, and we will, it is going to be because you chose it, freely, without fear." Lila let out a shaky breath, the adrenaline crashing out of her system, leaving her exhausted. She realized he was right. She was trying to outrun the pain. She slumped against him, her energy gone. "Can you just hold me?" she whispered. "Please, just hold me, yes," Nico said, "always." He guided her onto the bed. They did not undress. He kept his boots on. She stayed in the oversized hoodie. They lay down on top of the covers, side by side. Lila curled into him, fitting her body against his side. Nico wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her tight against his chest. She rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart. It was a lullaby of strength. She reached out, her fingers tracing slow, lazy circles on the inside of his wrist, right over his pulse. It was a touch of ownership, of trust. Nico lay awake long after her breathing evened out into sleep. He stared at the ceiling, one hand resting on his gun on the nightstand, the other holding the woman who had unknowingly started a war he was now sworn to finish. The peace did not last. The next morning, the warehouse was filled with the sharp, metallic tension of imminent danger. Nico was already up, checking the clip in his handgun, when Adrian burst through the partition. "Boss," Adrian said, his face grim, "we have a problem." "What is it?" Nico asked, holstering the weapon. "Our spotters at the docks just called in. 2 SUVs with tinted windows have been circling the block for 20 minutes. They are not cops. They are private military contractors. Brandon." Nico swore softly. "He hired professionals. How did they find us?" Lila asked, sitting up on the bed, clutching the blanket to her chest. Her eyes were wide with panic. "They did not find us," Nico said, moving quickly to grab his jacket. "But they are sweeping the area. They know I operate out of the docks. They are shaking down every warehouse in the district." He turned to her, his face calm but urgent. "We have to move. This location is burned." If they are this close, it is only a matter of time before they kick down the door. "Where are we going?" Lila asked, scrambling out of bed and shoving her feet into the boots Rosa had brought her. "Uptown," Nico said. "I have a safe house in the Heights. It is fortified. We will be safe there." Nico signaled to Adrian and the two other guards who were stationed at the door. "Pack the drives," he ordered. "Clear the room. Leave nothing behind. We leave in 2 minutes." The convoy consisted of 2 cars. Adrian and a driver took the lead vehicle, a heavy SUV. Nico and Lila took the second car, with Luca driving. Lila sat in the back seat, her hand gripped tight in Nico's. He was tense, his eyes scanning the mirrors, his body angled toward her as if to shield her from the window. "Stay low," he told her as they pulled out of the alleyway. "Keep your head down until we hit the highway." They navigated the maze of industrial streets, the morning fog clinging to the shipping containers. For 10 minutes, it seemed like they were clear. They merged onto the on-ramp for the expressway, the city's skyline rising in the distance. Then, chaos erupted. As they passed under a concrete overpass, a black van screeched out from a service road, slamming sideways into the lead SUV. Metal crunched with a sickening sound. Adrian's car spun out, crashing into the guardrail. "Ambush!" Luca shouted, swerving hard to the left to avoid the wreck. "Get down!" Nico roared, his hand slamming onto the back of Lila's neck, forcing her head into her lap. Gunfire erupted. Pop, 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 pop. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The back window of their car shattered, showering them in cubes of safety glass. Lila screamed, the sound torn from her throat. Nico threw his body over hers, covering her completely. She could feel the heavy weight of him, the tension in his muscles as he became a human shield. "Drive," Nico yelled at Luca. "Push through." Luca floored the accelerator, the engine screaming. But another vehicle had blocked the exit ahead. Men in tactical gear were pouring out, raising automatic weapons. "They are blocking the road," Luca yelled. "Stop the car," Nico commanded. "We are sitting ducks here. Get to cover." Luca slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a halt behind a concrete pillar supporting the overpass. Nico kicked the door open. He grabbed Lila by the arm, his grip bruising in its intensity. "Move!" he shouted over the roar of gunfire. "With me, now!" He dragged her out of the car. The air was filled with the smell of burnt rubber and gunpowder. Bullets chipped away at the concrete pillar inches from their heads, sending dust and debris flying. Lila stumbled, her legs refusing to work, but Nico did not let her fall. He wrapped an arm around her waist and hauled her behind the thick concrete barrier of the highway divide. "Stay down," he hissed, pressing her back against the cold cement. He pulled his gun, checking the sight lines. He looked back at her. His face was bleeding from a small cut on his cheek where a shard of glass had hit him, but his eyes were clear and focused. "I have got you," he promised, shouting to be heard over the chaos. "I am not letting them take you." He gripped her hand, squeezing it so hard her fingers ached. A painful, desperate tether in the middle of the war zone. Lila squeezed back, burying her face in his chest as the world around them exploded into violence. The echoing crack of gunfire died away as quickly as it had started, replaced by the screech of tires on asphalt. The black van that had rammed them peeled away, its occupants realizing that attacking a Moretti convoy was a bite more than they could chew. Nico's men had returned fire with a precision that turned the ambush into a retreat within 60 seconds. Under the shadow of the concrete overpass, the air was thick with the smell of burnt rubber and the sharp, copper tang of adrenaline. Nico stayed crouched behind the barrier for a long moment, his body a heavy shield over Lila, waiting to be sure the silence was real. "Clear," Luca shouted from the front vehicle, his voice strained but steady. "They are running, boss." Nico let out a breath that shuddered in his chest. He pushed himself up, his movements stiff, and pulled Lila with him. She was shaking, her hands gripping his shirt so hard the fabric threatened to tear. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unfocused, staring at the spot where the bullets had chipped the concrete inches from their heads. "Are you hit?" Nico demanded, his hands roaming over her arms and shoulders, checking for blood. "Lila, look at me. Are you hit?" Lila shook her head, a jerky, mechanical motion. No, I am fine." Nico nodded, the tension in his jaw relaxing slightly. "Good, "Get back in the car. We are burning the tires until we get to the uptown house." He turned to open the door for her, and that was when Lila saw it. The sleeve of his dress shirt, torn just below the shoulder, was soaked in a dark, spreading stain of crimson. Blood was dripping down his forearm, tracking over the tattoos and landing on the dusty pavement. "Nico," she gasped. The sound strangled. "You are bleeding." Nico glanced down at his arm as if he had forgotten it belonged to him. He flexed his hand, grimacing slightly. "It is a graze," he said, his voice dismissive. "A ricochet. It looks worse than it is. Get in the car." Lila, he tried to usher her inside, but Lila did not move. Her anger at Brandon, the fury that had fueled her for the last 24 hours, evaporated in its place. A cold, sharp terror pierced her chest. She had spent days worrying about her own safety, about her reputation, about her freedom. She had never stopped to consider that the invincible man standing in front of her could bleed. She reached out, her trembling fingers hovering over the torn fabric. "You are hurt because of me," she whispered. "I am fine," Nico snapped, though his eyes were not unkind. He was running on combat instincts, and right now, his priority was movement, not medical attention. "We talk later. We move now." He practically lifted her into the back seat of the damaged car. As he slid in beside her, slamming the door, Lila watched the blood continue to seep into the fabric of his shirt. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stop a sob from escaping. This was real. The game they were playing against Brandon was not just legal maneuvering and public relations spins. It was bullets and blood, and Nico was the one standing in front of the gun. The safe house in the Heights was a world away from the industrial grit of the warehouse. It was a penthouse apartment in a pre-war building, with crown molding, velvet drapes, and a view of the park. It was quiet here, safe. In the master bathroom, under the harsh glare of vanity lights, the reality of the morning laid itself bare. Nico sat on the edge of the bathtub, his shirt removed and discarded in a ruined heap on the floor. Rosa, who had traveled in the second car, was efficient and silent as she cleaned the wound. It was, as Nico had claimed, a graze, a deep furrow across the deltoid muscle where a bullet had passed too close. It was ugly and angry red, but it had missed the bone and the artery. Lila stood by the sink, handing Rosa gauze and antiseptic tape. Her hands were cleaner now, steadier, but her heart was still hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Hold this," Rosa instructed softly, pointing to the edge of the bandage. Lila stepped forward. She placed her fingers on Nico's skin to hold the gauze in place while Rosa reached for the scissors. His skin was hot, radiating heat. Lila's fingers were careful, terrified of causing him pain, but as she smoothed the tape down, the touch became something else. It became intimate. Her fingertips skimmed over the hard muscle of his shoulder, tracing the edge of the white gauze against his tan skin. She looked at his chest. It was a map of violence. There were old scars, faded white lines from knives, small puckered marks that looked like old bullet wounds, and the vibrant, dark ink of his tattoos swirling around them. Every mark told a story of survival. And now, there was a new one, fresh and bleeding, with her name on it. Rosa finished clipping the bandage. "There," she said, patting Nico's good shoulder. "Keep it dry. I will go make tea. You both look like you have seen a ghost." Rosa bustled out of the room, closing the door behind her to give them privacy. The click of the latch echoed in the tiled room, making the sudden silence feel heavy and thick. The room felt too small. Or maybe it was that Nico felt too big, without his shirt, stripped of the armor of his suits. He was overwhelmingly physical. Lila did not step back. She stayed standing between his knees, her hand lingering near the bandage. "How many times?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nico looked up at her, his gray eyes guarded. "How many times what? How many times have you been hurt?" Lila asked, her eyes tracing a jagged scar on his ribs. "How many lives have you risked?" Nico shrugged, the movement causing a slight wince that he tried to hide. "Enough. It is the life. Lila, you pay for what you take." Lila felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time, You did not take anything. You came for me." She looked at the fresh blood staining the white gauze. "I cannot do this. Nico," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can handle Brandon lying about me. I can handle the fear of being locked up, but I cannot bear to see you bleeding because of me. If something happened to you, if you died because I was too weak to save myself." Her voice trailed off, choked by the emotion rising in her throat. Nico stared at her. He saw the guilt eating at her, the way she was trying to take responsibility for the violence of his world, his guard, usually made of iron and discipline, cracked. He reached up, his large hands cupping her face. His thumbs brushed against her cheekbones, wiping away the moisture there. "Listen to me," he said, his voice rough and honest, stripping away all the bravado. "I did not do this because I am a hero, and I did not do it because you are weak." He leaned forward, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I made my own choice the night I opened that door. I knew who Brandon was. I knew what could happen, and looking at you now, knowing you are free, I would do it again. I would take a bullet every day of the week if it meant keeping you out of that cage." Lila let out a shaky breath. The intensity in his eyes burned through her defenses. He was not offering her charity. He was offering her devotion. She leaned into his touch, her hands coming up to cover his, pressing his palms closer to her face. The fear that had been driving her all morning shifted, transforming into a different kind of heat. She did not want to run anymore. She did not want to hide. She just wanted him. She tilted her head and kissed him. This was not like the kiss in the warehouse, born of panic and adrenaline. This was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question and an answer all at once. Nico went still for a heartbeat, surprised by the shift, and then he made a low sound in his throat and kissed her back. His hand slid from her face into her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the angle. The kiss grew heavier, hungrier. Their bodies seemed to fold into each other, drawn together by a magnetic force that had been building since the moment they met. Lila stepped closer, moving between his legs, her hands sliding down his arms and then up his bare chest. Her fingers trailed over the ridges of his muscles, the smooth skin of his scars, exploring the man beneath the myth. Nico groaned against her mouth, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The heat of his skin seeped through her clothes, branding her. He trailed his mouth down from her lips to her jaw, and then to the sensitive hollow of her throat, tasting her pulse. Lila arched into him, a gasp escaping her lips, the sensation of his stubble against her neck, the strength of his arms holding her, erased the memory of the cold, sterile penthouse. Here, there was life, there was fire. She slid her hands up his bare back, feeling the powerful muscles shift as he lifted her effortlessly, moving them away from the cold tiles and toward the bedroom. They moved with a desperate, fluid grace, neither willing to break contact. When they reached the bed, they slowed down. Nico looked at her, his eyes dark with desire but clear with intent. He was asking without words, and Lila, looking back at him with a gaze full of hunger and absolute trust, gave him the only answer that mattered. The afternoon light had turned golden, casting long, warm shadows across the bedroom. The world outside, the police, the ambush. Brandon Cole felt 1,000,000 miles away. Lila lay tangled in the white sheets, her head resting on Nico's chest. She could hear his heartbeat, slow and steady now, a comforting rhythm that lulled her into a state of peace she had not felt in years. Nico's arm was wrapped around her, his hand tracing abstract patterns on her bare shoulder. He was staring at the ceiling, a look of profound contentment softening his features. "I feel guilty," Lila murmured, her voice sleepy and thick. Nico's hand paused. "Why? Because the world is falling apart out there," she said, running her hand over his chest, careful to avoid the bandage. "And I feel happy. I feel more alive and free right now than I did when I was living in a mansion with a perfect fiancé." Nico turned his head to kiss the top of her hair. "That is not guilt," he said quietly. "That is just breathing. You have been holding your breath for a long time. Lila, He tightened his hold on her. "I have never wanted someone outside my world this badly," he admitted, his voice low, a secret shared in the quiet of the room. "I thought this life meant I had to be alone, that I was too dirty to touch anything clean without ruining it." Lila propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. She traced the line of his jaw. "You did not ruin me. Nico, you woke me up." They lay there for a while longer, savoring the stolen time, until the vibration of a phone on the nightstand broke the spell. Nico sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. He reached out and grabbed the phone. It was the signal that reality was waiting for them. "Talk to me, Adrian," Nico said into the phone, his voice shifting instantly back to command mode. Though he kept his other arm firmly around Lila, Lila watched him, admiring the way he could switch between the lover and the leader. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her, listening. Nico listened for a long minute, his expression hardening. "Are you sure?" he asked. "The voice signature matches." He paused again. "Okay, bring the equipment. We are done running." He hung up the phone and looked at Lila. The softness was gone from his eyes, replaced by the sharp glint of determination. "They found it," he said. "My tech expert cracked Brandon's private voice logs. We have recordings of him authorizing the payments to the women. We have him discussing the fraud with his accountant. And we have a call where he explicitly mentions putting you in the room to cool off." Lila felt a surge of vindication so strong it made her dizzy. "We have him. We have evidence," Nico corrected. But Adrian raised a point. "If we just dump this on the internet, Brandon's lawyers will claim it is deep fake audio created by the kidnappers. They will say I manufactured it to blackmail him." "So it is useless?" Lila asked, her heart sinking. "No," Nico said. "It is a weapon. But a weapon needs someone to pull the trigger." He sat up, wincing slightly as his shoulder moved, and turned to face her. "A public institution, the FBI, the district attorney. They will not touch this evidence if it comes from the Moretti crime family. They need a credible witness to verify it. They need a victim to stand up and say, 'This happened to me.'" Lila went cold. She understood what he was saying. "They need me," she said. Nico nodded slowly. "You are the missing piece. If you walk into a federal office and hand them this drive, backed by your testimony, Brandon is finished. But it means coming out of hiding. It means standing in front of cameras, lawyers and your family. It means facing him." Lila looked down at her hands. She thought about her parents, who still believed Brandon was their savior. She thought about the press, who were currently calling her unstable. She thought about Brandon's smug face as he locked the door. She looked back at Nico. She looked at the bandage on his arm. "I am done hiding," she said, her voice finding a new steel. Nico studied her face. "Are you sure? We can find another way. I can put pressure on—" "No," Lila interrupted. "No more shadows. I want to take control of my own narrative. I want to look him in the eye when his world burns." She took a deep breath. "What is the plan?" Nico stood up and began to dress, his movements efficient. "We make a deal," he said. "Oh, you reach out to him. You tell him you want to come home. You tell him you were confused, that you ran away, but you are ready to be his wife." Lila felt a wave of nausea at the thought. "You want me to go back to him?" "Only for an hour," Nico said grimly. "We set a meeting, neutral ground, or somewhere he feels safe. You wear a wire, a high-fidelity recording device. You get him to admit to what he did to you, to his face. Once we have that confession on tape, combined with the files, the feds move in." He stopped, looking at her with intense worry. "I hate this plan. Lila, I hate the idea of you being within 10 feet of him. If he touches you—" "He will not," Lila said, standing up and wrapping the sheet around her like a toga, "because you will be there. I will be close. Nico promised. My men will be everywhere. And the federal agent No, he will be listening in real time." Lila walked over to him. She placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. "I am not afraid of him anymore, Nico, because I know what real strength looks like." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "Let us set the trap. I do not want to live in cages anymore. Not Brandon's cage. Not the cage of my own fear. And Nico?" He looked down at her. I do not want to live in your cage either, she said softly. I do not want to be the girl you have to hide away to keep safe. I want to fight beside you. Nico looked at her for a long moment, seeing the transformation from the terrified girl in the penthouse to the woman standing before him. He felt a fierce surge of pride. Okay, he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. We fight together. The elevator rose smoothly, the digital numbers counting up toward the 52nd floor. For Lila Hayes. The sensation was sickeningly familiar. It was the same elevator, in the same building, heading toward the same penthouse where she had spent 96 hours staring at a locked door. But this time, she was not a prisoner. She was the bait. Lila smoothed the fabric of her dress. It was a simple, elegant navy sheath that Nico had selected for her. It covered her arms and reached her knees, conservative and modest, exactly the kind of thing Brandon approved of. But beneath the silk lining, taped securely to the small of her back, was a high-fidelity recording device. It felt warm against her skin, a constant reminder that she was walking into the lion's den with a weapon. She closed her eyes for a second, summoning the image of Nico's face as they had stood in the hallway of the safe house 10 minutes ago. He had held her shoulders, his gray eyes fierce and terrified all at once. If anything feels wrong, he had told her, his voice rough with the weight of the risk they were taking. You walk toward the door. I will be there. The elevator chimed. The door slid open. Lila stepped out into the foyer of the Cole Plaza penthouse. The space was exactly as she remembered it. Cold marble, abstract art, and the faint scent of lemon polish. Brandon was waiting for her. He stood in the center of the living room, wearing a casual cashmere sweater and slacks, looking every inch the worried, grieving fiancé. When he saw her, his face crumpled into a mask of relief that was so convincing it almost made Lila pause. "Lila!" he cried out. He rushed forward, arms open wide. Lila tensed, every instinct in her body screaming at her to run, but she forced her feet to stay planted. She let him pull her into a hug, his arms clamped around her, possessive and tight. He smelled of expensive cologne and the scotch he had been drinking to calm his nerves. "Oh, thank God," Brandon murmured into her hair. "I was so worried. I thought I had lost you. I thought you had done something foolish." Lila stood rigid in his embrace for a moment before gently pulling back. She kept her face composed, channeling every ounce of strength she had borrowed from Nico. She looked at him with wide, apologetic eyes. "I am sorry, Brandon," she said, her voice steady but quiet. I got scared. I did not know what was happening to me." Brandon's hands lingered on her arms, his thumbs rubbing back and forth in a soothing, patronizing rhythm. "It is okay," he said, guiding her toward the sofa. "You were confused. I told you that you were having an episode. You just need rest. You need to be home where I can take care of you." Lila sat down on the edge of the sofa. Brandon sat close to her, too close, his knee pressing against hers. "Where did you go?" he asked, his voice dropping, the concern sharpening into interrogation. "Who were you with?" "I just walked." Lila lied smoothly. "I stayed in a motel near the highway. I just needed to think." Brandon studied her face. Looking for cracks, he seemed satisfied that she looked tired and subdued. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You had me terrified. Lila, the press is everywhere. I had to tell them you were sick just to keep them from tearing you apart. I saw," Lila said. She took a deep breath, knowing she had to steer the conversation toward the cliff edge. "That is why I came back. I realized you were right. I must be sick, because no sane person would be locked in a room by the man she loves, right?" Brandon stiffened. His hand froze near her face. Lila looked at him, keeping her expression innocent. "Why did you do it, Brandon? Why did you put the keypad on the door?" Brandon sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. He leaned back, crossing his legs. "We've been over this, darling. I had to control you. You were spiraling. You were trying to leave, but you locked me in." Lila pressed, shifting slightly so the microphone on her back would have a clear line to his voice. "You trapped me." And you told me my family would pay if I tried to get out. Brandon chuckled darkly, shaking his head. Your family paid back their debt with your life. Lila, that was the deal. I saved your father from prison. I paid $2 million to clean up his mess. In exchange, I got a wife who would stand by my side and look the part. You belong to me. It is a simple transaction, 2 floors above in a rented suite that had been turned into a mobile command center. Nico Moretti stared at the monitor. The feed was grainy, hacked into Brandon's own security system, but the audio was crystal clear. He heard every word. You belong to me. It is a simple transaction. Nico stood motionless, his fists clenched so tight that the knuckles were white. A vein pulsed visibly in his neck. His jaw ground together with enough force to crack a tooth. Do we have it? He growled. Next to him, the federal agent, a man named Miller who had been chasing the Cole family for years but never had enough evidence, nodded grimly. He adjusted his headphones. That is a confession to human trafficking and false imprisonment, Miller said. We have him. Move in. Wait, Nico said, his eyes glued to the screen. Not yet. She needs to get clear of him. On the screen, the dynamic was shifting. Brandon was leaning forward, his face twisting. Down in the penthouse, the air had turned cold. Brandon was no longer playing the worried lover. He had sensed the resistance in Lila's posture. You are acting strange, he said, his eyes narrowing. You are not crying, usually. You cry when I remind you of your place? Lila looked at him. The fear was still there, beating in her chest, but the anger was hotter. She was done playing the victim. I am not crying because I am done crying over you, she said, her voice hardening. I am not a transaction, Brandon, and I am not property. Brandon stood up slowly. The charm evaporated completely, revealing the cruel, spoiled boy beneath the expensive clothes. You are whatever I say you are, he sneered, and if you ever try to run again, if you ever try to embarrass me like this, I will not just lock you in the guest room. I will find the person who helped you. That little friend you were with? Lila's heart stopped. He knew, or he guessed. I will find him, Brandon threatened, looming over her, and I will make sure they never find the body. You think you can defy me? I own this city. That was it. The threat against Nico snapped the last thread of Lila's composure. She stood up, facing him down, her chin lifted high. You do not own anything, she said, and her voice ringing out with fierce, shaking anger. You are a fraud, Brandon. You are a thief who steals money from charities and buys women to cover up your insecurities, and you are going to answer for everything you have done. The silence that followed was deafening. Brandon stared at her, realizing too late that this was not a breakdown. It was a setup. His eyes darted to her dress, scanning her. Who are you talking to? He hissed. He lunged for her. Lila tried to step back, but he was too fast. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully, and reached for the neckline of her dress with his other hand. He felt the hard plastic of the recorder taped to her spine. You bitch! He screamed, his face contorting into a mask of pure rage. He didn't let go. Instead, he yanked her hard, dragging her across the marble floor. Security, he bellowed. Lila clawed at his hand, digging her nails into his skin. But his grip was like iron. He was dragging her toward the hallway, toward the east wing, toward the locked room. I should never have let you out, he snarled, hauling her as she stumbled and fought. You belong behind that door. I will keep you there until you rot, Lila screamed, kicking out, her heels skidding on the polished floor. No, let me go. Brandon shoved her forward, throwing his weight against her to force her down the corridor. They were 10 feet from the reinforced door. Suddenly, the front door of the penthouse exploded inward. Nico Moretti stormed into the room, leading a phalanx of armed men. He looked like a wraith of vengeance, his gun drawn, his face a terrifying mask of cold fury. Let her go, Nico roared, his voice shaking the walls. Brandon spun around, seeing the armed men. Panic flared in his eyes. He realized he was outgunned in a desperate, cowardly move. He pulled a small handgun from the waistband of his slacks, a holdout weapon he kept for show, and grabbed Lila by the hair. Yanking her back against his chest, he jammed the barrel of the gun against her temple. "Back off," Brandon screamed, his voice cracking. "I will kill her. I swear to God, I will kill her." Nico froze. His men froze. The room went deadly still. Nico's gun was trained perfectly on Brandon's head, but the angle was bad. Brandon was using Lila as a human shield, cowering behind her slim body. "Drop the gun." "Brandon," Nico said, his voice eerily calm, though his eyes were burning. "It is over. The feds are in the lobby." "There is nowhere to go. I am taking her with me," Brandon yelled, backing up slowly toward the locked room. "Open the door, Lila! Open it!" He shoved her toward the keypad. Lila looked at the door, the heavy, reinforced steel that had been her prison. She looked at the keypad. She remembered the hours she had spent counting cracks in the ceiling. She remembered the feeling of fading away. Something primal snapped inside her. She was not going back in that room. Not alive. Not dead. Lila looked at Nico. He held her gaze, and in that split second she saw him shift his weight, preparing to move. She made her move first, with all the strength she had. Lila lifted her foot and stomped her heel down onto Brandon's instep. It was a vicious, crushing blow. Brandon howled in pain, his grip loosening just a fraction. Lila twisted her body, dropping her weight to pull herself out of his line of fire. As she broke free, she didn't run toward Nico. She ran toward the door. She grabbed a heavy bronze sculpture from a hallway table, a modernist piece that weighed 10 pounds, and swung it with both hands. She smashed it into the keypad panel. Sparks flew as the electronics shattered, the plastic casing cracked, and the mechanism died. "No one locks me in here again," she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, a declaration of absolute freedom. In the distraction of the sparks and the scream, Nico moved. He cleared the distance in 2 strides and tackled Brandon. They hit the floor hard. Brandon's gun skittered away across the marble. It was not a graceful fight. It was raw, ugly, and personal. They rolled across the floor, crashing into a glass side table that shattered into 1,000 diamonds. Brandon fought with the desperate flailing of a man who had never been hit. Nico fought with the precise, brutal efficiency of a man who had grown up in the docks. Nico landed a punch to Brandon's jaw that snapped his head back, then another. He straddled Brandon's chest, pinning him down. Nico's hand wrapped around Brandon's throat, squeezing, cutting off the air. He stared down at the man who had caged the woman he loved. The urge to finish it, to close his hand and crush Brandon's windpipe, was overwhelming. It pulsed in his blood, dark and seductive. "Nico!" Lila's voice cut through the red haze. Nico looked up. Lila was standing by the shattered door. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her hair was wild, and her cheeks were streaked with tears, but she was not looking at him with fear. She was looking at him with an anchor's weight. "Don't," she whispered. "He is not worth it." Nico looked back down at Brandon, who was gasping for air, his face turning purple, his eyes bulging with terror. Nico loosened his grip. He leaned down, his voice a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "You are lucky she is watching," Nico said. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. The elevator dinged. Federal Agent Miller burst into the penthouse with a tactical team. FBI! Everybody down! They rushed into the hallway, weapons raised. They found Brandon Cole pinned to the floor, defeated and gasping. And they found Lila Hayes standing amidst the wreckage of her former prison, holding the recording device in her hand like a holy relic. The fallout was swift and total. Brandon Cole was arrested on charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, wire fraud, conspiracy, and human trafficking. The recording Lila had captured was played in every newsroom in the country. The files Nico's team had uncovered decimated the Cole holding stock. The empire built on image crumbled overnight under the weight of the ugly truth. 3 days later, Lila stood in the living room of her parents' modest suburban house. Her mother was weeping into a handkerchief on the sofa. Her father sat in his armchair, looking 10 years older, his head in his hands. "We didn't know," her father whispered, his voice trembling. We thought he was helping us. We thought he loved you. Lila, please, you have to forgive us. The debt, It blinded us. Lila stood by the fireplace. She looked at the people who had raised her, the people who had unknowingly sold her to save themselves. She felt a great, hollow sadness. But the anger was gone. "I forgive you," Lila said quietly. Her parents looked up, hope fragile in their eyes. "But I am not coming back," she continued, her voice firm. "I am not going to live here, and I am not going to fix this for you. You made your choices. Now I am making mine." She walked to the door. "If you need me, call me, but do not expect me to save you again. I am done being the payment for your mistakes." She walked out of the house and down the driveway. She did not look back. The sun was setting over New Harbor, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The old wooden pier at the edge of the docklands was quiet, far away from the media circus uptown. Nico sat on a pylon, looking out at the water. He wore a fresh shirt, white and crisp, but the bandage under it was a reminder of the cost of the last week. He looked tired, the kind of tired that goes down to the bone. He heard her footsteps on the wood planks before he saw her. Lila walked up to him. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair tied back in a ponytail. She looked like herself, not a bride, not a victim, just Lila. "Hey," she said. Nico looked at her. He offered a small, weary smile. "Hey." He stood up, facing her. The wind whipped at his clothes. "It is done." He said he was denied bail this morning. "He's not getting out. Lila, you are free." Lila nodded, looking out at the horizon. "I know. It feels strange, quiet." Nico took a breath, shoving his hands into his pockets. "You are really free now," he said, his voice steady but guarded. "The feds have you in witness protection pending the trial, but after that, you can go anywhere. You can start over. You can find a life that is clean, safe." He looked at her, his eyes raw with the effort of letting her go. "If you want to walk away from me, Lila, from this world, I will not stop you. You deserve better than a man who lives in the dark." Lila looked at him. She saw the hesitation, the fear that he was just another cage, another danger she needed to escape. She stepped closer. She reached out and took his hand, pulling it out of his pocket. She placed his palm over her heart. "Can you feel that?" she asked softly. Nico nodded, feeling the steady, strong rhythm of her beat. "You are the first person who opened a door for me without asking for anything in return," she said. "You bled for me. You fought for me. And then you let me go." She stepped in, closing the distance until they were chest to chest. "I have seen the clean world, Nico. It was full of lies. I would rather be in the dark with someone real. I do not want to walk away," she whispered, tilting her head up. "I want to choose, and I choose you, fully, knowing exactly who you are." Nico let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into him, burying his face in her neck. "Lila," he murmured against her skin. They kissed. It was not frantic. It was long, unhurried, and deep. It was a seal on a promise. Their bodies pressed together against the cold wind, generating their own heat. Lila's hands tangled at the back of his shirt, holding him close. When they pulled apart, the city lights were flickering on behind them, illuminating the skyline. It was a dirty city, dangerous and complicated. But as they stood there, foreheads resting together, it looked beautiful. 6 months later, the apartment was small. It was a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that was safe, if not fashionable. But it had big windows, and the morning sun flooded the kitchen with golden light. Lila stood at the stove, stirring eggs. She was humming. Nico sat at the tiny kitchen table. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing the scar on his shoulder. He was reading a newspaper, but his eyes kept drifting to the woman at the stove. There were still challenges. The trial was coming up. Nico still ran the shadows, though he was slowly steering the business toward legitimate shipping. But the fear was gone. Lila turned around, bringing 2 plates to the table. She set them down and kissed Nico on the cheek as she sat. Nico reached out and took her hand, squeezing it. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Nothing," Nico said, looking around the small, sunlit room that they had built together. Just no cages. No cages, Lila agreed. She squeezed his hand back, a woman who finally owned her choices, sitting across from the man she loved, ready to face whatever the day brought. Thank you so much for listening to Come Here, I'll Break Your Cage. I hope you enjoyed this story of resilience, danger, and love. We would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling us where you are listening from. And if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and share your thoughts in English. Your support helps us bring more of these stories to life.